evening. My name is Seth. I am a believer who struggles with anxiety. And I want to start my testimony with one word that I believe ties the many chapters of my past as well as the current one, and that is faithful, which is not a word I choose to define me, but God throughout my journey. And my story is one of those rare ones where starting at the very beginning is actually pretty important, and that's where we'll begin. December 12th, 1977, in the middle of a snowstorm when a little red-haired boy was born. Now, I emphasize boy because my mom desperately wanted a little red-haired girl, and when I appeared, she started crying. To which the doctor truthfully said, "Well, what do you want me to do, put him back?" As the first week of my life passed, my parents realized that their new baby boy could not hear a thing. They'd say my name, they would shout, they would bang on the washer and the dryer, and I would not respond or even flinch. In realization that their baby was deaf, they called the doctor to make an appointment but couldn't get in until a few days after Christmas. However, before that appointment occurred, two miraculous events took place. And the first was on December 23rd, in the middle of Sesame Street, when I, now an 11-day-old, stopped breathing for many long minutes. My brother, who was 2, saw that I had started to turn blue and yelled for my mom. The ambulance that was called for never arrived on the scene, and the police officer who did come refused to take me to the hospital without proper child restraints. Only a miracle could save me at this point. And that miracle came in the form of a friend of the family named Vicki Grover, who was also a nurse. She arrived at just the right time, and it was she who started giving me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and she who gave me chest compressions. It was she who refused to give up on me, and it was she who forced the police officer to take me, my mother, and her to the hospital now. Now, though my life was saved, my parents were told, due to the amount of time that I went without oxygen, that I'd probably have brain damage for the rest of my life. Take him home, they were told. Love him. That's the best you can do. Well, despite the fact that my siblings often teased me as I grew up, claiming that I did have brain damage, my brain works just fine. And just days later, right after Christmas, with prayer teams lifting me high, the second miracle occurred. When the cuckoo clock above my crib struck midnight, and I, who was deaf, heard it and started screaming. Just like that, God healed me. I could hear, and I can still hear perfectly well. Another miracle in which God alone gets the glory. He was faithful. And my parents, man, they sure went through a lot during those first 2 weeks of my life, and they had a lot to talk about when they finally did have that doctor's appointment. Now, in addition to the prayer teams that I have been told about, there were others who were also praying. Not just for me, but also for my siblings and my same-age cousins, which there was a total of 10 of us. Now, one of those that was praying was my Grandma Vincent. If you were here last night, Jan Strout talked a little bit about her at the very beginning. She was an amazing woman of God who could play the piano, sing, and even help my grandfather with his sermons whenever needed. And the other was my mom, another amazing woman of God whose father was an alcoholic. My grandmother's prayers for us were specific. She prayed that each one of us would come to know the Lord, and that another pastor from within my generation would come forth. For her husband was a pastor, and his father before him was a pastor, and his father before him was a pastor. My mother's prayers were also specific. She prayed that alcoholism would stop with her dad and be done in the family. Now, obviously, if you know me, you kind of know how this story is going to end, for here I am, a pastor who's not an alcoholic. And so my story tonight has a lot to do with, how did I get here? How did these prayers get answered, including my grandmother's, who died in 1984? Well, it started when I was 4 at Vacation Bible School at Pleasant Street Baptist Church in Mechanic Falls, when I raised my hand kind of like this, not because I had a question, but because I was making a proclamation. I wanted Jesus in my life. I believed what my teachers were saying and what the Bible had, what I was told that the Bible said, that Jesus is the Son of God, that he did die on the cross to take away my sins, and that he rose again 3 days later. And I would go on to learn so much more about God and the decision I had made to accept Christ as my Savior over the next few years there at the Baptist Church. Actually, Linda's grandfather was my pastor, right? Chantel's grandfather, Larry Jordan. And those roots that I was developing in God were only strengthened after my family decided to join the Vineyard in 1990. And as I headed into high school at St. Dom's, I'd say my walk with God was at really an all-time high. And I've asked Jenny to throw some pictures up. I think this is where the first one fits in. This was me in high school. My hair was a little bit longer back then. My son looks a lot like that. But as I neared graduation, I still hadn't heard that call that my grandmother was praying for to become a pastor, though I did have a heart for missions. And so when I graduated in 1996, I followed the Lord's lead in my life to set off for Zimbabwe, Africa, where I served alongside a local vineyard pastor, as yes, the vineyard, it is everywhere. And after being with he and his family, along with their church, for about 4 months, I came home and started prepping for college. For in the fall of 1997, I was about to start a new chapter in my life as an elementary education/history major at Gordon College in Massachusetts. However, this chapter for me did not have a very good beginning. For before I could even get there, I started having just these excruciating headaches, and my vision started to fail, to the point that I couldn't recognize even my closest friends as they came into the store I was working at. I couldn't read the prices on the computer screen like 2 feet in front of me. So after a trip to the eye doctor, my first MRI, and a visit to the neurologist, my family and I were told what was happening to me. I had a large brain tumor, that big white mass right in the middle, that was growing inside of my head at the base of my optic nerves, and I would require surgery to remove it. Now, I must add that on the way home from that life-changing eye doctor appointment, I decided to rent a movie thinking it would take my family's minds off of things. The movie I picked out was called Phenomenon. It's about a guy who gets a strange type of brain tumor and dies. I don't recommend that if you ever find out that you have a brain tumor. True story. Crazy. Now, part of what made the news about me so difficult for my family was that my grandfather, the pastor, had died of brain cancer. Though my type of tumor was different than his, it was hard not to think about that possibility for me. And so I tried my best to focus on what I could. Hey, let's just get through the surgery and move on with life. Little did I know that this was only the beginning for me. Reality struck quickly after the surgery, as my doctors began prescribing multiple medications and told me that I would need to spend my last summer before college going through 30 rounds of radiation treatment in Boston, where I was mostly alone, away from my family and my friends, where I was young, scared, tired, and unskilled at city life. Learning the subway system was challenging. Staying in the Ronald McDonald House for my first week of treatment was more so. Daily, my focus was on counting down those treatments and looking forward to starting college, which eventually I would do, just not as I had planned, for I arrived just days after my last treatment, as skinny and pale as could be, with a whole lot of emotional baggage. While there, I wrestled for a long time with, why did this happen? I failed a class. I barely passed several others. I changed my major 4 times, and at one point, my parents wrote me an encouraging letter saying that I should drop out. Hey, I was wasting a lot of their money. Now, thankfully, during that time, I had also spent 2 summers in India working with Mother Teresa's ministries. I was introduced to a place called the Academic Success Center while at school, where I learned how to study. And I met a beautiful girl from Maine who had a car. and who also made me study before we could hang out. Yes. Now somehow, by the grace of God, I walked out of there with a biblical and theological studies degree, and a month later, I watched that beautiful girl who had the car walk down the aisle and stand with me when we were married in June of 2001. She's in the back. Hey. Now, less than 24 months into our marital bliss and 6 years to the day of my first surgery while at an annual checkup, my doctor ruined our plans of celebrating those 6 healthy years by telling us that the tumor was back. Talk about a life-altering gut punch. And just 2 weeks later, life went on hold again as I underwent my second brain surgery at Boston Children's Hospital, home to one of the best doctors for my type of tumor, craniopharyngioma, where he decided that rather than go up my nose, like the first doctor did, that he would cut open half of my skull. Soon after recovering, my wife and I decided to move back to Maine from Massachusetts to be near our families and start a family of our own, which we thought would be pretty simple. But the doctors told us that it was very unlikely that we would have children because of the surgeries and the radiation that I had gone through. And to be sure, I had a count done to see if my body made what was needed, which it didn't. My count, which should have been in the millions, came back with a 0, as in 0% chance that you're going to be a dad. Now, this news that I wasn't going to be able to have kids was hard enough, but what made it so much worse was that it also meant that my wife, who desperately wanted to be a mom, couldn't have kids because of me. It left me feeling like a failure, useless, broken, and that I was devastating my wife's dreams of being a mother. But what amazed me about her is that rather than, we just mope about it, we decided that either foolishly or faithfully to fight. We decided to cling to whatever hope there might be, whatever we could find, because the doctors never said that it is impossible. And so we resolved to keep moving forward until it was. And our first step was to go to my endocrinologist. And he thought it might be possible to get my body jump-started if we did daily steroid injections with monstrous needles. And that was to increase my testosterone. Now, it sounds easy, but that's a big fat lie. First of all, it was nearly impossible to get the medicine that we needed and very expensive. At times, we had to order it through other countries and hope it was legit. And then I had to build enough courage to try to put that stupid thing into my own leg, but try as I might, I never could do it. And so each shot had to be administered by Nurse Vincent, my wife. And we started doing this in December of 2003, and quickly we learned 2 things. 1, this is not going to be easy. And 2, this is not very romantic either. You see, when we got ready for bed at night, Emily would go into the bathroom to prepare the syringe. And she would mix the little compounds, and then she'd flick the bubbles out, and then she'd come sit next to me with that. I would bite down on a pencil, attempting to keep my leg as still as could be, and I'd yell, 1, 2, 3, go! Then I would just scream the whole time as she would slowly inject the medicine into my constantly sore thigh muscle. And it only took me one time to learn that you should not tighten your leg muscle during this process. Because when you do, the needle gets pushed back out, and she's going to shove it back in. Oh, that was bad. So after making this our routine, 5 nights a week, month after month, for 10 months, of pain, of disappointment, of discouragement, and strain on our marriage, God showed himself faithful when he answered our prayers in October of 2004, when Emily woke me early one morning to tell me that she was pregnant. It took us a total of 170 shots, but my son, Brady Michael, he was worth every single one. Their very first picture. Now, this joy that we felt in our lives as we experienced being parents was soon quenched. As before we even celebrated his first birthday, I noticed that my eyesight was starting to fade once again. And so I requested an MRI, which revealed that the tumor was back for a third time. This one brought about a different response in me. It made me angry. It made me mad. I was a father now, God. Why are you doing this? And I was terrified that my son was going to have to grow up without me. And with no other choice, just weeks later, in March of 2006, the doctor opened me up this time from ear to ear, removing my whole forehead while using pliers inside to get every single piece of tumor and scar tissue that he could. It left what we called a Mickey Mouse scar. Now, despite the team's best efforts, 30 treatments of radiation were again recommended, but this time there were possible side effects. If I went through with it, there was a 15% chance that I could go blind at any point during it or over the next 2 years. But if I didn't do it, there was no promise as to what might happen. The tumor might come back again, a fourth time. Seeing that I'd already lost my ability to smell, to taste, to make babies, and that I was on a number of meds for life, we decided to take that risk and have the radiation. That was the mask that was tied to the table so that you couldn't move during radiation. Now, during that 2-year window, there were a lot of nervous mornings and scares from headaches and sleepless nights. I was terrified at the thought of not seeing my family again. But through it all, we put our trust in God and believed that He would be faithful either way. And as crazy as it sounds now, and it truly does, apparently, I had so much faith and trust in God that just over a year after the radiation, while I could still go blind, I gave Emily a gift that probably no other woman would ever want to receive for Christmas, but one that brought her tears of joy. A package filled with a chewed-up pencil, Band-Aids, needles, and a prescription for my medication, as I desperately wanted to try to have another child, and she was just waiting for me. Now, little did I know that it would take 18 months of torture for that gift to come to fruition. For we had 17 months of failures this time, multiple counts at 0, a false positive on my wife's 30th birthday, and a failed IUI, even when the numbers were good. My testosterone numbers hit such high marks that they rival the Incredible Hulk. Seriously. Causing high levels of anger in me at the drop of a hat, including times when I just had to go run, like just run. And don't forget the 372 injections. Actually, it was 373. I had to give one to her this time around too. But in the end, every bit of pain, every shot, every dollar we spent, every time we cried was worth it, as another example of God's faithfulness occurred when Jackson Robert was born to us in 2010. Now this year, that baby boy turned 11. Brady will be 16. Emily and I will celebrate 20 years of marriage. And this August, it will be 15 years since I finished my last treatment of radiation. He is faithful. Yes. Now, yeah, thank you. In these last 15 years, and through God alone, that child who was said to have brain damage went on to complete his master's degree as a straight A student and became a board-certified behavior analyst. Through my God-given love for sports, I ran a half marathon at age 35, and I've been able to coach both of my son's sports teams. through the prayers spoken over me, through the early teachings that I have received by my parents, by my Sunday school teachers, and by those over the years here at Pathway, my love for the Lord has continued. It's developed and it's matured. And now, my grandmother's prayer has been answered in full, as I now serve as a pastor here at Pathway. And I love what I do. I love being a part of the church, leading life groups, seasoned saints, and more, but just because my title is pastor, it does not mean that I don't have struggles, hardships, and chapters of my life that I wish I could just skip over, like the one that I am in now, which started last fall with the heavy pressure that I felt and applied to myself regarding COVID and keeping people safe, keeping my family safe, keeping people in church safe, fighting the fight of masks versus no masks, and finding my place in social issues. Add to that a lack of self-care time versus an abundance of time spent on events here and at home, and the result was I began to feel overloaded. At the same time, we had a tree come down at home during a windstorm that hit our pool, and while being out there during the storm checking on damage, I heard the fear in my children afterwards. Nowadays, windy days, and what might happen next begin to strike deep fear in me. And then there was Christmas. Sadly, I don't really recall a lot of what happened that day other than it rained, like it poured, causing all the snow we had to melt. And as we opened gifts and entertained family, all I could think about was, what if it comes in the basement? What if the roof leaks? What if the power goes out? What if? My anxiety wrecked Christmas for me, a day that I love. And then, well, it didn't help that within that week we also had our shower fixed because of a leak, a window fixed because one of the boys went through it, all the while having a plumber in the house dealing with other issues. And with every job, there was always something left for me to do. Paint this, clean that up, which by itself were small tasks, and which by themselves were small tasks, but together, with everything else going on, it was too much. And I started having emotional breakdowns, and I found myself unable to function. It felt like my mind started to just like tighten, and then my muscles were aching all the time. Tiny tasks like take out the garbage, put away the dishes, or take the dog out, they became like huge, monstrous tasks that overwhelmed me, and I couldn't handle it. I didn't know how to express it, I didn't know how to deal with it, and the temptation to go down that other path that my mom prayed against years ago was very real. And for that reason, I began to realize I need help. And so on January 8th, I went in to see my doctor. And I discovered how hard it is to admit out loud to a physician that I have a problem. It broke my pride. But I did it. I took my first step and I cried out for help. He recommended that I start seeing a counselor as soon as possible, and he gave me a medication to take as needed. That night, after I made it home, my wife came in from taking out the dog, and as she walked up the steps, she felt a drip land on her head, which we discovered was from the snow that was melting on the roof, that was leaking in through the shingles into the attic and out of the light fixture above our front step. Well, let me tell you, if I had thought I'd already hit my low point, I was wrong, for this just broke me. I had finally admitted that I had a problem. I had sought out help, had medication in my hand that I never wanted to take. And then another problem that was out of my control, which I felt like I could do nothing about, took place. And I just lost it. Right then and there, I just cried, like my body just heaved. And at the directive of my wife, I humbly took my first dose of my new medication. In time, I did start seeing a counselor, which now, man, I would recommend to anyone. And I continue to see her every single Monday. As the sessions have progressed, I've been able to talk about and work on a lot of my issues. There's always a new one. That's, I always go into, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, and then I come out crying. Man, she is helping me so much. Just develop skills and strategies to use and helping me see things from a different perspective. And since I'm a visual learner, I've even created a lot of these using construction paper, and I have them on this board so that I can remember them better. But along with talking with my counselor, I've also started talking with others about my anxiety, which is surprisingly freeing. And in doing so, it's helped me and others realize that we are not alone in this. Now, one of the first times I said something publicly was at the end of a Thursday night service, which was not in my plans, it just kind of came out. But as the words were coming out, I found myself worried that people were gonna like scoff. Like, oh my goodness, you have a problem. But what happened was they cheered. They cheered for me. And I was rendered speechless. And so I want to thank you to those who were there that night. That meant the world to me. And as I close, I would also like to say how thankful I am to my wife for 20 years of love and support, to my family for their support, to my counselor, and to my church. But more than anything, I just want to say I am thankful, God, for you, for your faithfulness throughout my past, which has made me who I am today. And while I am not quite ready to be thankful that I now have a psychological diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, I am thankful that I do not have to carry that around as my identity. For I am defined by God, as it says in 1 John 3:1, and God alone, as his child. And tonight, I can't wait to commemorate the fact that I have now made it 98 days since I first admitted to my doctor that I have a problem. And what I'm looking forward to doing is when either Jenny or Tom, whoever brings out these coins, I want to come up and get one. I was here a couple weeks ago when somebody else was sharing, and I desperately wanted to come forward, but fear and my anxiety and what are people going to think kept me back. Well, tonight that's going to change. And if you're thinking of doing the same for whatever battle you're in, don't let anything stop you from joining.